Hello, everybody. I'm Milan Verveer. I'm the director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and I am just thrilled to be here on this occasion, to be here with the Women's Learning Partnership, over which I have had a long-standing collaboration and friendship and great admiration for the work the partnership does. And coming here together to launch this extraordinary locally led research on family law reform, I think is something we should all celebrate, because it's an area that, as many of you know very well, is such a challenging one, but one that is so critical. And we're going to have an extraordinary panel discussion, women from different parts of the world talking about the challenges, and hopefully we can say someday, if not today, the opportunities when things change enough that we truly can bring about significant change. Just let me tell you a little bit about the Georgetown Institute. We have only been launched some 4 years ago now, and I was the first U.S. ambassador for global women's issues, and it was very clear to me, working at the State Department, working with women all over the world, that as we were developing our national action plan on women, peace, and security, women belong at the peace tables. They need to bring those ground truths to the discussions to ensure that agreements don't end after the first 5 years that they're signed, and that's true of half of them, that civil wars don't recur, as most of the conflicts are recurring. And we have so few women mediators, negotiators, so few women involved in the critical aspects of peace and security. And so we were founded to precisely put together the kind of work that the Women's Learning Partnership does, except our focus is completely on research and scholarship having to do with the role of women in peace and security. Because it became very clear to me in government that, as often is the case when it comes to issues that we're all concerned about, which is answer the question, where's the evidence for this? Why does it make a difference? Why do women need to be at the table? What can they possibly bring to the table? So we have been engaged in that kind of work, and our determination is to bridge theory, to bridge a lot of the academic work with practice to really impact decision makers. So just last week, we were at the United Nations for the annual discussion on the Security Council Resolution 1325, linking women to peace and security. And we had a very significant event focused on women mediators who came together with UN officials to really put a focus on the difference that they are making and the need for them to be connected with what's happening at the top. We've also recently released the first ever global index on women, peace, and security. It is a comprehensive review of the condition of women globally, and it's the first time that the data that exists has been brought together not just on inclusion, the things that matter greatly, but are always the focus: education for women, political participation, economic participation, but we add the dimension of security. You know, a young girl may be in school, but is she safe walking to school? Is she safe in her own household? Intimate partner violence, the perception of, am I safe in my community? So the whole security dimension, as well as the dimension of justice. So what are the discriminatory practices that are also affecting the condition of women? We have copies of it, and it's on the website, and the reason we put it out is really to be a tool for people like yourselves who are really leading the way in so many places around the globe, because we rank 153 countries on how they are doing on women, peace, and security. I also want to say that I have worked with Manaz over many years. When I was working at the White House, it was Manaz who was one of our experts who we brought in at the time to help us with global women's issues. And then the Women's Learning Partnership became a reality. And there were so many opportunities where we came together. And I remember most fondly, Manaz, those times at the United Nations, the last year that I was ambassador, to sit around the table at the UN US mission and to really hear from some of the great people who are here today about what was happening in their countries and what needed to be done. So you have been just an extraordinary resource. The kinds of trainings you do. I have the first manual still, and it's as good today as it was when you first produced it. The million signatures that you have collected, these campaigns that you have done to really put issues on the table, and the quality of the studies that go on, and just locally led, coming from the wisdom of the global South, and not putting, the views that everybody else puts on the table, but really listening to people like yourselves, many of you who represent the global South. I see my friend Asma Khader here from Jordan. I can't tell you that every time I go to Jordan, she would be the first person I would talk to get whatever wisdom she wants to convey, because she's one of the great human rights leaders in the world, not just in Jordan. But I remember when we were working on violence against women, very, very tough issue in that part of the world, as many of you know. And it was the wisdom that came out of those conversations and how to describe them. Family protection, put family protection there and you begin to make progress on violence against women. So Asma, it's just always wonderful to see you, and I'm so glad you're here today. I think this issue is vitally important. You can't make a lot of progress for women unless we make progress on the topic that we're here to describe, whether it has to do with marriage, divorce, custody of children, whether women can move about freely, inheritance. So many constraints that keep women back are because of these laws that exist. I remember years ago when I had started Vital Voices and worked with the Vital Voices, women like yourselves around the world, and working with the Moroccan women, what they have gone through. I don't know if anybody's here from Morocco, but the times in jail, the suffering, so many of the women I still know, the physical ailments they started to get in prison affect them to this day. And yet they persisted. They were not about to have their faith hijacked by those who said there cannot be family law reform, Mudwana reform in Morocco. And then the young king, the present king, set up this commission working with the women, and they brought about this amazing progress. Now, it's not easy to implement. I think you will agree to this day. You need to educate the judges. You need to educate the public. You need to educate women to know what their rights are. You need all kinds of training. But it was a breakthrough, an absolute breakthrough event. And I still tell people all over the world about what Morocco did. And I remember when the publication of the new reform took place, and it would say something like, what was in the new law? Women have the right to custody of their children, followed by a Quranic verse to undergird that. And that had such impact because so many of the societies, are extremely conservative. And that just empowered the women and really enabled progress to happen. So, Manaz, I'm thrilled that we're all together today and that Georgetown can be a part of the launch of this incredible research. I don't want to take more time. Please come up, and then we'll have our panel discussion.
Thank you, Malan. It's always such a pleasure. I have to tell you that many of us in this room and many of our partners have been either displaced women or refugees or exiles. And I came to this city as an exile. And as you all know, when you're in exile, the first thing that happens, you have this shake-up of your identity. Who am I now that I'm not who I used to be? And if I have to say, with full belief in what I'm saying, that Milan's friendship and support was one of the reasons that I had it easy, that I really rolled to the next stage and found who I am, which was closer to the image I had before being in exile. And of course, those were the days, my friends. Those were the days when the White House was the home of all the activists, all the passionate people who were struggling for human rights. I remember after many years that period was coming to an end, we gathered in one final gathering of NGOs and activists, and we kept saying, where are we going to hang out anymore? Because Milan's White House was where we used to hang out. So anyway, Milan, on behalf of myself and all the other exiled women that you have helped, thank you. And for all that you have done for women around the world, both as head of an NGO and as ambassador and a force, a global force. So we are so happy to have Women, Peace and Security Institute supporting us, and I'm hoping that this support will continue and we will be able to work together and use the networks and the collaborators and resources that we have at our disposal to move forward. The other collaborators and supporters of this initiative are, of course, IDRC. Our Rula is there, who is from IDRC, the research institute that has not only supported financially this multi-year research, but also in the presence of and the person of Rula has had a lot of moral and activist support for us as well. And then, of course, Amnesty International, with the new Secretary General, Kumi Naidu, who is a marvelous male supporter of women's rights. He was one of the first to start an organization of men for women's human rights. And he said, as soon as I called him and said, we need support, he said, okay, we have 7 million members, just write an MOU. What is it that I can do, you know? And so that's the activist piece of it, and of course UN Women, which is the United Nations and the governments. So as Milan said, what we want to do is to have activism, scholarship, governmental policymakers, and human rights membership organizations gather together, and then organizations which are for the public good, such as environmental organizations, others, because the idea that we are devising a campaign for is not simply about legislation, it's not simply about women. I think after 20 years of working together in 20 countries, in 20 languages, we have come to understand that the shape of families, the structure of families, is the foundational unit that determines how people relate to each other. It's in the family that we learn, are we going to be inclusive? Are we going to be egalitarian? Are we going to be justice-oriented? Are we going to encourage freedom of expression? Or are we going to be top-down, hierarchical, patriarchal? And I have to say that we as mothers have been products of the culture of patriarchy just as much as the men have been. And of course, they have benefited in some ways a lot more than we have. But nevertheless, without our assistance and support, this thing would have been falling apart much sooner. It is us as mothers who tell our little girls how to behave, how to cross their legs, how to wear pink, how to speak softly. It is us as mothers who tell our boys You have to be ambitious, you have to be competitive, you have to reach for more, you have to not cry, you have to speak up. So it is us, that culture change that we have to bring about, and that culture change has to reflect itself in many, many different areas, from education to community development to politics to economics. And it's not, our campaign is not simply about family law, which some countries don't have specific legislation called family law. But in this wonderful country, which is going to be wonderfuler again, it's going to be hugely wonderful. So in this country, we still don't have maternity leave. We still don't have affordable childcare. We still have 3/4 of the women earn 3/4 of a man's salary. We still have all these issues, and it is all, again, going back to the family, but not necessarily one particular piece of legislation. So what we want to do with this campaign is really learn how to change culture, and through the change in culture, to bring about change in the architecture of human relationships, the way in which human beings relate to each other. And I think that that is the key that we have found after 20 years, where every year, once or twice a year, we all have come through all kinds of difficulties together to discuss these things for days on end and to go back and experiment on the ground. We have come to understand that this is the way that we have to go. And I also want to really thank all of the partners who happen to be here for their extraordinary contributions to their own societies. And the fact that the partnership that they have helped to build is in itself a prototype that I think it would be very helpful for others to use, to benefit from. Because it's one thing to have people that you meet once in a while, or have a long email list, or send things to, and another thing to physically work together, constantly, ongoing, day after day, month after month, year after year, the kind of closeness that it brings about. And also for the idea that we could have gotten a whole lot more resources and grown the international secretariat into this big bureaucracy. We haven't. We've asked each of the partners to replicate the model and have several, like ASMA has 20 organizations in WLP Jordan. So it's a compilation of 20 organizations. Some have fewer. Some, like Morocco, have Tunisia, Algeria, Mauritania. Some, like Lusophone Africa, have several Lusophone countries working with them and learning. The Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa each have partners themselves. So it is through this model that we've been able to do this. So I hope that we will have a good conversation tonight and learn more about how to shape our campaign. I was just telling Malon a minute ago, she asked about the 1 million signatures campaign of Iran, and I was saying that I think it was Maliha who suggested, from Pakistan, who suggested, let's have 1 billion signatures, and really, why not? Iran was one country, one closed society in which they got 1 million signatures with 30% men. That's the least all of us together can do to have 1 billion signatures. And it's not just the signatures, it's what it signifies, that is the commitment to change, commitment to a better society. So there are all kinds of other suggestions, but I will not take more of your time. And so I think Lena is going to be facilitating, and our wonderful panel will be starting the conversation, and I hope we can spread to everybody and get all of your wisdom and ideas. So Asma, Joy, and Madhavi, and Lena, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mahnaz, and thank you, Milan, for having us. I'm Lynn Abou-Habib, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Learning Partnership. And I'm actually based in Lebanon, the country that has 17 family laws, 17 religious institutions that govern women. So I'm not sure. I think we can beat all the countries in the world. It's wonderful to be on this panel. The panelists are both friends and colleagues. Not only are they contributors to the anthology, but they are brilliant activists and academics who are well-versed in family laws. It's my privilege to have a conversation with you, ladies, so I have a few questions to ask, and later on we'll open the space for the other wonderful experts and activists in the audience. I start with Joy. Joy, thinking about Nigeria, could you share with us very briefly what are the key troubling issues in relation to family law or family laws in general, and what are the challenges that you face in your work?
Okay. Thank you, Lina. Nigeria's situation is a bit unique in that we may not have a law called family law in Nigeria, but we have two sets of laws that impact upon women in the families. And that's because Nigeria is predominantly divided into two, the South and the North. In the South, we have the customary court system. And these customary court systems are headed by not trained lawyers, but people who are seen as custodians of culture. They know the culture. And these judges, customary court judges, are appointed by the state government. And so their work is to give legal backing to cultures, to judge cases based on what the culture of that community is. And within those cultures, you're going to see issues like male child preference, widowhood rights, disinheritance of women, that's wives and daughters. In the Southwest, in fact, in Nigeria, many times women don't get to inherit. Even in the case where a woman loses the husband, she doesn't get to inherit what she worked with her husband, except she has a male child. If she does not have a male child, then the uncle or brother or grandfather, whoever is the next kin, culturally seen as the next person in line, will inherit those. Even if she has 7 daughters, the daughters go without. And then in the North, we have the penal code. And just to give you an example, the penal code also takes a lot from the culture, the belief system of people there. Section 55 of the penal code in Nigeria states explicitly that it's okay. It gives permission to the husband to chastise his wife, provided no grievous harm is done. So what is saying that provided you don't kill the woman, that it's okay to chastise. And so these are things, these issues. What this has done is that legal backing is given to cultures that are gender discriminatory, that encourage violence against women in the home. Thank you.
Thank you. So no matter what the laws are, they're equal in discriminating and oppressing women. Thank you. I want to turn to my dear friend Asma. In the case of Jordan, of course, family law and other laws are not in silos. There are connections, evil connections amongst them. Could you talk a little bit about this matter?
Yes, let us repeat what we agreed upon, which is all the types of discrimination and gender-based violence are based on the imbalanced power relation. And this is something that exists in family first, and this is the way how children are raised and how family relations are built. The structure of the family is duplicated in all other type of structures in the society. And because of the type of status of women in the family law, you can see reflections on this status in the like trade laws, like bank accounts for children, for example, women cannot control any bank account they open for their children because they are not the guardians of those children. So they contribute, they serve, but they cannot make decisions financially. They are not benefiting from the family allowances in the civil service, for example. They are not under the labor law, which is reflect what's going on in the society. We have maternity leave. We don't have paternity leave. So husbands and fathers are not responsible to take care of their children also. It has a reflection in the penal code as well. If you look through the penal code in many countries, from Nigeria to our region to anywhere else, you can find that there are discriminatory texts between how women bodies and sexuality and even criminality is treated, and how men. And you can find many texts that discriminate against women and that dealing with the bodies of women, like if those bodies are owned by somebody else, the father, the husband, the brother, the guardian, generally. So she will be punished more with less conditions. She will not get practically the defense she needs, and she will be maybe killed because, between brackets, honor reasons. Of course, we are happy to say that this is witnessed now like an end in a way. Maybe later we can talk about it. But even the penal code, I can tell you that there are 17 women sentenced to death in our prisons now. If you go through their stories, you will find that those women are victimized twice in their life. And then now, because the time they are imprisoned, the whole family, the whole society is ignore them like if they are not exist at all. They don't have any legal support, for appropriate one. They are not visited by the family members. They are divorced mostly if they are married. And they are not in a position to be able to pay money. They don't have the power, they don't have the resources to pay money to reconciliate with the family of the victim. So they will not be able to shift from death penalty to life imprisonment like the men can do. So in each steps you can see that there are discrimination. And also, to give you an example, the guardianship issue, that is the core, I think, in the family status, is that women sometimes are punished in the family. Nobody is documenting or knowing about it. She is maybe imprisoned. Many women are not allowed to even step out of the door. They are obliged to leave the study, to not going to work, to even marry somebody that they don't want, because the guardian decided that this is the best for her. A woman with 40 years age, 30 years age, cannot make decisions for herself, cannot marry without a guardianship signature. So I think, yes, the discrimination in the family is expanding to cover all the different types of structures in the society.
So it's like family laws inspires all other so-called civil laws.
Yes.
Madhavi, listening to this and also to the general public, there's this perception that these limitations on women's positions, women's rights, women's freedom, right, women's dignity, as if it's only within the developed countries. What do your study say about this? What are your main findings around this?
Sure. So, one of the things that I think is so important and powerful about the new book that we're celebrating today is the case studies are from around the world, not just Muslim countries, but Latin American countries, Brazil, Nigeria. Global, developed world, developing world, secular states, non-secular states. And I think that, but we have this notion that in a secular country where formally we have a separation of state and the religious society, that women's rights and women's issues aren't as affected by religion and culture. I'm an Indian American, and my husband's Indian American, and we have this funny joke where my son, when he was growing up, he was maybe 2, and he would identify us as Indian, but he was normal. He was just normal, and that's the way we think of the developed world thinks of itself, as neutral, not having culture, not having religion, but in fact the ways that religious norms and discourses and cultural norms and codes, they govern our lives much more than the formal legal codes. It is those social codes that affect what kind of sex education we have, whether we get sex education. It affects our access to contraception. It affects our health care. It affects, of course, the right to abortion, which is very much in jeopardy in this country now. And so partly that's because the lawmakers themselves are influenced by their own religious values, but it's also the religious institutions, our political actors influencing policymakers, and it's in this country very much, it's the highly partisan political parties that have themselves cultivated religious minorities and empowered them and empowered certain groups within those minorities, and that is how we have evolved to see abortion in particular as this real flashpoint where gender, religion, culture, equality all meet and are in great confrontation now. But I think it's important for us to study the role of culture and religion in developed countries and see the similarities. And I think that the studies that you have all been doing and are now documenting in a really important way in this new book can help illuminate our own historical struggles around abortion. The Me Too movement is very much about resisting a culture that defines women as daughters, mothers, wives, primarily, and so I think that seeing how we can learn from your strategies and your issues and how very I think salient they are in so many of our contemporary struggles here in the U.S.
Thank you. Actually, to be fair, that perception is not only prevalent here in the North, even in our own country. We tend to think that these are only our issues and they're not shared with sisters in the North, unfortunately. Joy, our book, our anthology, looks at the link between family laws and violence against women and looks at the activism that has led to changes. And you've supervised the case study in Nigeria. Could you tell us a little bit, based on the research that your colleagues have done, that particular link between family laws and violence against women?
Yes. First of all, we all agree that rights are interrelated, they are interconnected. The violation of one right automatically leads to the violation of several rights. For example, when you institute disinheritance as a law, it automatically leads to the practice of male child preference. So most families feel they don't have children unless they have a male child, just because of inheritance. And we also know that the family is one of the strongest socialization agents. And what happens in the family kind of affects what happens. People are influenced there. Their minds are set as to discriminatory ways of making decisions, seeing things, even in the larger society. And so, yes, there is a link. Even our constitution, I was just thinking of this. There was this issue that came out about 2 years ago. Our constitution places the marriage age for women at 18. However, there is a portion of the constitution that also says that once a woman is married, she's an adult. So that opens the door. Yeah. That opens the door for child marriage. And that's the constitution saying one thing and doing another, opening the door for people who want to practice child marriage. So, and according to the UN definition, violence talks about every form of exclusion, psychological or physical. And so these exclusions, these verbal, or even when it comes to physical, these are all forms of discrimination. They are all forms of violence, and they are backed by certain laws that we have in our land.
Thank you. Actually, in the case of Lebanon, the link is so clear when we were on the verge of ratifying or endorsing a law to protect women from domestic violence. The institutions that were against it were the religious institutions specifically. They rallied against it because they thought that is their remit, this is their space, the family is their space.
Yes, exactly.
Asma, you will find in the book, in that wonderful anthology, an amazing interview with Asma about the Jordan case. Can you also take us through that very briefly, that link between family laws and violence against women in the public sphere and in the private sphere?
Of course, as we said, the status of women within the family has an impact on all other spaces. Until most recently, gender-based violence at home, domestic violence, was seen as a private issue, as something that nobody have the right to interfere. The police were refusing to interfere until now, individually, even after the law and after the many amendments that we had, exactly like what was said about the importance of culture and practices and implementation of law. They refused to interfere because they didn't receive direct complaints from the wife. Nobody from the neighbors have the right to report that there is a woman beaten here and she's screaming, but they will not respond. And it happened that in one case, a woman was killed because a neighbor lady was calling the police, and they said, either you come and report and sign, or let her come and report. And she was not able to leave the home, she was killed. So this is one area. Also, in the environment that our region is living in, the conflicts, the crisis, the civil war, all of this, is pushing many to have an excuse that we have more interesting or important public issues like politics and economy and other things, so leave the issues related to women and to family aside. And this is also an excuse when you raise any issue that, well, you can wait. Yeah. We have other priorities. And the problematic part, exactly like what you described, Lina, the parallel systems, and in Nigeria, in Jordan there is 2 legal parallel systems, and in many other countries, in Palestine, in many countries, we have the religious courts, Christians and Muslims, and we have all the steps, the Court of Appeal, Sharia Court of Appeal, Court of Cassation. They even newly have the Sharia prosecutor, which means that they will take another part of the penal code to be under their authority. So they are expanding as a parallel legal system, and we all know that just legal system or judicial system should be the state one, and a civil one for all of the citizens. But in the case of Jordan, we have 17 sects, Christians, have 11 courts, and we have the Sharia courts as well, with all these ongoing development of the system, judiciary system. So when there is a gender-based violence and you don't know how to tackle the access to justice issue, are you going to ask for divorce only, or are you going to go to the penal code to ask for punishment for the perpetrator and compensations? And sometimes you have to do both. You cannot do it in one case. And in most cases, women prefer not to take actions because of many other obstacles that are not easy for a woman, the financial cost of it, the long period of trial that may take, and the very minimum results that she will gain. So to give you an idea, according to the law and to the concepts in the society, the man, the guardian, have full authority to make his daughters or female relatives or wife, sister, even mother, have the right to oblige her to obey. And if she didn't, he have the right to beat her. So it is how the majority of the society is interpreted the text of the Quran. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَفَعِظُوهُنَّ وَاضْرُبُوهُنَّ. بالنسبة للي بيعرفوا بالعربي. I don't know how to translate it. But anyway, there is a text that is used in this way. Also, the other thing, they are not seeing the free choice as a basic right. So he knows better. Your guardian knows better. Legally, he have to accept what you want. If he didn't accept, then you cannot make it. Otherwise, you will be seen as somebody who is not obeying the system or the family rules. And final point, lately we face the problem of what's so-called the absence of the girl or the woman from the family home, التغيب. And absence means that you go away and you didn't come back to the family home. In this case, the authorities are using the crime prevention law, the governance, to imprison women, to put them in prison for their own protection because they may be killed or harmed by their families. Just because they go out without the permission and they didn't come back. So this can describe how much the gender-based violence in the family are impacting not only her status in the family, but all her activities outside.
Melan mentioned the reforms in Morocco, and I remember very well speaking with our colleagues back in the day. And one of the arguments was that you cannot leave women and girls in the family. You cannot leave their fate to luck. If they're lucky, they're well treated. If they're unlucky, they're... So thank you so much. Madhavi has been a long-term collaborator with WLP, and you are the brains behind the corpus of laws, which has now become a reality, which we will be launching very soon. I'm going to ask you a question, a very brutal question, if you don't mind. Islam has been demonized as being, the evil source of violence against women and discrimination. But you're an accomplished scholar, and you've done research on the differences and similarities between cultures. What do you say about this?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think no religion has been more demonized than Islam. But in fact, we are so reluctant and resistant to look at the cold, hard truths. The cold, hard truths, first of all, documented by the work of the partners in Women's Learning Partnership for decades, looking at the feminist activism, the reform movement, the dissent, the successful legal reforms that Milan mentioned in Morocco in 2004, coming up with one of the most progressive family laws in the Muslim world many, many years ago now already. So we resist looking at that, but in fact, the documentation is there and everywhere. So in 2008, the Gallup poll did a poll that statistically represents 90% of the Muslim world. The poll included surveying some 35 Muslim majority countries, and I think statistically the poll represents 1 billion Muslims around the world, and this poll, I think, still remains incredibly powerful. It demonstrated that 90+% of Muslims surveyed believe in freedom of speech, believe in democracy. A whopping 78% believe in women's equality. The high percentages believed in women's right to vote, women's right to hold any job for which she's qualified, women's right to drive and freedom of mobility. And I think that what this poll really importantly demonstrated is that in the modern world, women and men, and by the way, this poll representing 1 billion Muslims, these are men and women, rural and urban, rich and poor, old and young. So this is the great swath of Muslims in the world today, and demonstrating that they affirm modern principles around equality and freedom and expression and democratic principles. That gets erased in discourses that become more powerful around a clash of civilizations. It's us versus them, and it's our civilization and democratic values and ideals, and it's our, laughably, the way we uphold women's rights that's most in jeopardy. But in fact, we need to recognize and emphasize the similarities and truly universal embrace. Now, that doesn't mean that people around the world embrace these values in the same way. Those values need to register in local languages, in local traditions, in local, in religious, with religious tenets and contexts, and they need to be negotiated and understood and made organic. But that process is exactly what the reformers here have been doing for decades. I guess I just want to end by saying, one, we need to demonstrate this universality of values and how they're embraced for a couple of really important reasons. One is that reformers on the ground, the first, I think we're hearing some of the most common arguments against, right? So Asma said, women's rights, that's kind of important, but we'll look at all these other things. First, we need security. First, we need, right? And so we'll get to that later. So that's certainly, but the other really common refrain is these are ideas coming from the West. These are outsiders' ideas. These are being imposed on us. And that is why I think demonstrating and shouting from the rooftops that, no, these are what we believe internally in these countries, within these communities. This is what 90-some% of us value within the Muslim world. And so to just put to rest that notion that ideas about equality and freedom are external and that are imposed. They are internal. And so I think that is a really important reason, aside from just knowing the truth, but because the truth is itself a powerful weapon against those claims.
Indeed, and you've talked about reformers, and I think that's what we're going to end with. Everybody on the panel are extraordinary reformers and have been struggling for years. And I want to begin with you, Julie. What has been the most joy? I'm sorry. Pardon, Julie. I want to begin with you, Joy. You've been working on this for quite some time with your colleagues. What do you consider to have been your main achievements? A place where you've been able to bring about change?
There's been, like we've been noticing for the past 2 years or thereabout, an increase in widespread condemnation of especially sexual violence in the homes. People are coming out to say no. When something happens in the home, you see civil society organizations, individuals, they rise up and condemn. So that sensitization has been built up, that resistance, that pushback is beginning to happen. You saw what happened in 2014 when over 200 girls were abducted from the school. It became a global campaign. Bring back our girls. And so that's what we see increasingly. And we have been involved in the family law reform activities, starting from the research to the presentation of research. And these are ways that we have been pushing out the information, sensitizing a large number of people in Nigeria. We also convened the regional TOT on family law reform in Nigeria just 2 months ago, and we are participating completely in the global campaign. So my takeaway, my encouragement is that people are beginning to see the evils that happen in families, and people are rising to condemn them.
And this links to what Madhavi was saying, changing mindsets, but
Yes.
also bringing it as a social dialogue, so no longer something
Yes.
that we don't
People
talk about.
accept, and this culture of silence is gradually going away.
Exactly. I think we celebrated recently several successes in Jordan. May I say that they're largely due to our friend Asma. So if you want to share them with us.
We are many,
yes,
of course, in Jordan. And absolutely, the last few years, we get to have some results that we struggled for several years ago. And the most important one was the amendments for the penal code, where one article that is shameful, Article 308, which was allowing the perpetrator in sexual crimes to marry the victim and go free. And this was a really huge struggle and a very important exam of our power.
Yeah.
And we found that working with youth, building coalitions, based on research as evidence to our work, and being brave enough to break the taboos.
Yeah.
This is very important. We were a little bit, in the previous years, fear that there are areas we cannot talk about it. But it seems, no, we have to talk about every unjust situations, and the strategies that our collective work and our exchanging of experiences all the time help us designing a campaign that include so many different stakeholders and partners to be on the same stage, which is the unity of the activists together. Is very important. And also the strategies to catch the moments where is a possibility to jump and use some opportunity that occurred. For example, in this campaign, it was very important to catch the moment when the king nominated a royal commission to reform and develop the judiciary system. We jumped and we prepared a memo that without amending these laws, judges will never be able to be just, because they are applying laws and the laws are not just. So the result was recommendations from the committee to His Majesty, who is reporting to the government. You have to implement these recommendations. One of them was fully abolished Article 308. But not only this, also the mitigation sentence for perpetrators committing crimes under the name of honor, defending the honor, is stopped. And our organization, Sigi Jordan, this week launched a statement that there is a drop of 44% this year and 60% last year in the crimes, family crimes against women, but after the law was amended. So we can see how much the amending the law has an impact, automatic impact. While many are still not aware about the new laws, we need a campaign to sensitize the public about the new laws. Also, there was strengthening the punishment against sexual harassment, against committing crimes against disabled girls and women. There was many other amendments which was very good. But still, there are some discrimination. We still struggle to have a phase of full equality in the Constitution. We are not still having this. But on the other hand, we developed or amended the family protection law, which was the first in the Arab region, 2008, and it was an initiative by our organization as well that time. But it was not adopted the way it should be, so it has to be amended. And it is amended also partly, not fully, but it is still better than not having anything. We do have some services available now newly, at least after years of struggling. The government opened a shelter for women under administrative detention, which was a demand by civil society, and our organization is one of them for years. So there are many progress indicators in the situation. Still, we have many gaps. Also, lately, there was an amendment to the retirement law where women will be able to their families, children especially, and husbands, will be able to inherit their salary if they passed away. In the previous law, when a woman died, her salary stopped. The state will benefit from what she paid. Also, the health insurance was only for her and not for her family. So there are many achievements going on, and I think it's time to keep pressing, because also we have a very good family law, very similar to the Moroccan one, and this is the domino effect.
Yeah.
That because after we abolished Article 308, there was in Lebanon, in Tunisia, and other countries, we benefit from the Moroccan and Egypt also abolishing this article before, or similar articles before us. Also now, I think the effect after the Moroccan for family law was also affecting our family law. So we have a better one, but not excellent one. It is still has some gaps, but I think it's better, much better than the one we had before. So the challenge of child marriages is still there, but a huge campaign in the country now is going on against child marriages. And I think there is some progress, by at least there are many parliamentarians loudly, publicly supporting the campaign, which we never heard before. Parliamentarians were always feel that anything related to women issues, that mean the West, that mean damaging the unity of the family. It's not the same now. So I think there are many opportunities ahead, but it needs a lot of work. And I hope that our global campaign on equality in the family, based on the research that we have now, will lead to a better situation, because we deeply believe that it is all started in the family. If we were able to achieve equal rights within the family, between girls and boys and husbands and wives, then maybe the whole problem of discrimination can be able to solve.
Yes. Thank you. And I think I want to borrow the slogan of our Moroccan colleagues during their campaign, because this is an example of change is necessary and possible.
Yes, of
that
course.
was their main slogan.
Yeah.
Madhavi, your last words of wisdom on the issue of reform also.
Okay, so I'm a law scholar. I'm a professor of law at Georgetown here, and so my reform work has been in the form of scholarship, and one of my interlocutors has been human rights law. And in fact, after 9/11, I said that religion isn't to blame here, but it's law that's to blame, because international human rights law understands religion, defines it, and actually protects it as this extra legal space that is supposed to be a place without equality and without rights. It is supposed to be a lawless place, but that's only because law defines it that way. And I actually talked about the irony, because international human rights law grows out of World War II, and it seeks to pierce the sovereignty of national sovereignty, saying that states can no longer get away with flagrant human rights violations. We have an international human rights community backed by law that will pierce the veil of that national sovereignty to help the individual thrive. But what happened over time was that the new sovereignty was religion and culture. So you saw the freedom of religion and the right to cultural survival and cultural preservation being used to say the CEDAW doesn't apply to us, being used to create the exceptions to women's rights in particular around the world. And so my work was really to say, no, in fact, if we look at the work of these reformers around the world, they are piercing the veil of religious sovereignty and cultural sovereignty, and showing that, in fact, within these traditions, there are really important egalitarian values, egalitarian norms within the religious doctrines, but also look at the lived realities of women, look at the fact that these women in these individual societies belong to multiple communities. They are in a cultural and religious community, a geographic community, but they have the national constitutional laws protecting them. They have international laws protecting them. So these reformers complicating that story, contesting what the religious community even is or stands for, and what, where that authority should come from. I had the great privilege of publicizing your work and helping the legal community to understand that we can actually be approaching religion and culture very differently than we had been. And so it was really, and to be able to help tell that story and to show not just that what's happening around the world is the application of Western human rights law in other countries, but whoa, no, you're actually pushing back and saying Western human rights law is getting things wrong. Why should we accept the choice of either religion or freedom? Either culture or equality. And Manaz and the Claiming Our Rights manual said, we want and demand and deserve both and all. And that, I think, brought a revolutionary new affirmative vision for all women's human rights movements. So that is what I got to do, but of course, I'm still doing that too.
And I think we'll all continue to do this, but that's an amazing bridge between scholarly work and activism. Thank you so much, the three of you. That was, no, we're not done yet.
Questions.
I want to turn to the audience, and we have wonderful people amongst us, especially, well, we have two of the editors of the book. We have two of the people who've been interviewed in the book. We have at least one person who produced a case study. So I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm looking for Anne Mayer. I'm looking for Anne, and I want to have your take on that conversation on family law reform, the link between family law and violence against women. Anne Mayer, one of our... Yes. Could you introduce yourself, Anne?
It's on? Okay. I really don't have a lot to... Oh, sorry. I don't really have a lot to add to what has already been said in this connection, but I did have a couple questions that I'd like to hear your responses to. One of my questions is the term violence against women. Obviously, we're in an English-speaking environment, and I think violence against women is a very useful term. It really puts people who are otherwise indifferent to the sufferings that women endure, often in the area of domestic fights and abuse and other situations, puts them on the spot. Have you found that the term violence against women, not necessarily the English term, but the concept is useful?
Thank you. And I just want to remind our audience that our concluding chapter in the anthology has been written by Anne also, and it's a brilliant chapter. This is the conclusion. May I take a few... may I ask Samira to share with us that amazing experience of family law reform in Morocco? And Samira is from our partner association in Morocco. I shouldn't be introducing people, okay. They should be introducing themselves.
So, I'll do it in French, please. Je suis tellement ravie d'être dans cette institution magnifique qui est l'université de Georgetown.
I'm delighted to be in this wonderful institution in Georgetown University.
Donc, je partage et je suis honorée des témoignages qui ont été faits de l'expérience marocaine.
I'm going to share testimonials, short testimonials from the Moroccan experience.
Ok. So, peut-être au Maroc, nous avons effectivement, comme l'a dit donc nous avons eu cette chance de travailler ensemble avec nos consoeurs en Tunisie et en Algérie.
In Morocco, we had the chance to be working with our sisters in Tunisia and in Algeria.
Et donc, au sein du collectif Maghreb Égalité en 95, il y avait la production jour et nuit des 100 mesures pour changer les codes des statuts personnels.
And they came together into a structure which was called Collectif Maghreb Égalité 95. And within this think tank, they developed these, what they call the 100 measures for equality.
Donc ça a permis justement d'arriver à ce résultat majeur qui est un code de la famille en 2004 au Maroc.
And this was the precursor to the reformed family law of 2004.
Peut-être l'intérêt de cette réforme, c'est cette rupture qui est magnifique et qui va nous être d'une grande utilité, cette rupture donc institutionnelle et judiciaire et également sociétale avec le passé.
And the important thing in this process was this rupture, institutional, social, political, with the past. So there was a cut with the past.
Donc nous sommes passés d'une société où la femme devait l'obligation à l'homme en contrepartie de l'entretien.
So we shifted from a situation where women had an obligation vis-à-vis men
à une société avec un code de la famille qui préconise la co-responsabilité.
To a situation where you had a family code that had a co-responsibility rather than male head of household.
Oui, nous sommes également passés d'une situation où le code de la famille ou le code du statut personnel était considéré comme une affaire religieuse et donc qui passait à travers un décret royal du roi qui est Amir al-Mouminin à bien sûr à une institution sécularisée qui est le Parlement qui vote et qui amende le code de la famille.
And we shifted also from a family code which was totally a religious affair to a secular family law.
Ceci a permis, bien sûr, une révolution au niveau de la société.
So this actually meant a revolution at the level of society itself.
Malheureusement, les compromis ont fait qu'il y a des vides juridiques, d'une part, juridiques. Il y a un large pouvoir discrétionnaire des juges et il y a également des fois des dispositions discriminatoires dont la plus importante est l'inégalité au niveau du système successoral ou au niveau de l'héritage.
Okay. However, what they have now is what she's calling a judicial gap, a gap at the level of the judiciary, because many decisions are left to the discretion of the judges, and the issue of inheritance is still unresolved.
Donc, nous profitons bien sûr de cette campagne globale. Nous pensons globalement parce que nos problèmes sont communs à maints égards, pour agir localement. Après 14 ans,
we're part of the global campaign because our problems are global and we're acting locally.
Donc nous allons continuer le travail au niveau régional avec nos consoeurs de la Tunisie principalement et de l'Algérie, mais aussi au niveau mondial pour pouvoir, bien sûr, pallier à ces défaillances.
And these are the gaps that they're looking into now. I'm adding inheritance and judicial gap, and they're continuing to work within this campaign with their colleagues in Tunisia and Algeria.
Merci Lina.
Je t'en prie. Merangiz is the author of our Iran chapter. So this is literally putting somebody on the spot.
Okay. Okay. Okay, yes, I have written the part with my daughter, Azadeh Purzand, the part about family law in Iran and the history
of family law in Iran, because in Iran, as a Muslim country, Muslim society, we had passed some kind of reform before revolution, and before revolution we were going to have some reform in family law. It was not ideal, it was not according equality between men and women, but it was much better than something that we had before that. But unfortunately, after Islamic Republic and after Islamic Revolution, immediately some leaders, religious, political leaders of the revolution, they said that this part of reform during Shah all are in contradiction with Sharia, and that's why they changed that again. And I'm not sure that such a thing happened in some other Muslim countries in the region. I'm not sure that they had something positive reform, and they lost that. If I'm not correct, please make me correct. But I think we do not have this kind of evolution in some other country. So I tried my best that make it clear that we were going towards some better situation in family law in Iran, in the age of marriage, because it was getting to 18-year-old, and something like custody. It was really was brilliant, some change that we had before revolution. And it was not for mother or for father, just the court could make decision about that. And probably they said, the court said that not mother and not father, they are not good for having custody. And I think that was really brilliant in custody reform. And some other thing that I guess Mahnaz knows much better than me, because Mahnaz was trying her best and her organization for approving that legal part of family law during that time. But anyway, right now that I'm talking, I cannot explain everything because it is very long story. Just I can say that Iranian women, they were not silent all the time, and they had many kind of reaction against Sharia law and against some very radical interpretation of Sharia law that ayatollahs and maraji in Iran, they were publishing that, and now they are publishing that. And the government is an ideologic government. The political system is ideologic, and the ideology is a very radical Islam and a very political Islam. And according to the Constitution, the only source for legislation is Sharia, nothing else. So they can, they can do anything that they like, and they can say this is coming from Sharia, and nobody has right to criticize that. And that's why our situation as women's rights activists and women's rights lawyer was getting very dangerous, because when we were critical with the legal system after Islamic Revolution, they were accusing us as murtad, as somebody who is doing against Islam, working against Islam. And it was, and it is very important, obstacle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shall we take a few? Okay. I think I have a question from Anne, and may I ask if you have any? Yes, Ladan.
I have one question to you, actually. When you mentioned that at some point we have to claim both universal human rights, our religion and our culture, and we should not allow these spaces of exception to universal rights based on religion and culture. But how do you do that when these are so explicitly contradictory?
Thank you. Shall we take a... Yeah, Nadire.
Thank you so much. This was brilliant, and thank you, Mahnaz, and thank you, Melan, for organizing this. I just want to come back to what you said, that Islam is the most demonized religion. Unfortunately, it seems that none of the other religions are any better either. I mean, the whole thing with beating your wife is in the Bible, is in the, is in the nearly every religion. I just came from a conference in Germany. It was called the German Arab Women Business Leaders Summit. And at this summit, the German women were actually complaining more than the Arab women about the law and the regulations that were preventing them from becoming businesswomen. Yes. In the Middle East, we have a large number of businesswomen, a lot of. So I just want to see what do you see in the other countries, and like what you mentioned about Lebanon having all of this, essentially the plethora of diverse religions. Are women in other religions better off? What I hear here in this country now during this time is that we are actually, all of these issues that are being discussed in the Middle East are now, we hear them here too. So maybe there is more, it's more, I don't even know how to pose the question, but how can we go against the entire humankind about the world, about these issues, and which religion or which society is better off than the other? It's just a depressing period right now.
I'm going to take another, Aroub.
Thank you all. I want to reflect to what Joy just said about, women not having their inheritance. Well, this is not the case in Jordan. In fact, women get the right to have their inheritance, but mostly they give up this inheritance to their male family members. You know why? Because they are deprived not of the inheritance, they are deprived of the family protection if they refuse to give this money or this inheritance to the family, back to the male family member. So it's almost the same. You are in the law protected to have your inheritance, but unfortunately you lose the inclusiveness of the culture and the protection of the culture and the family. So it's all the same. It's, you go around it, whether it's by law or by culture. So I don't know if there is a solution for this, but this is the case of Jordan. And I have a question about the state taking care over the custody of the children. What does it mean, the state takes the custody of the children? How can they protect them, or where do the children stay at that time?
Thank you. Maybe one more, and then I'll give just 2 minutes to each of our panelists to respond as you wish to the question. Yes, Anne?
Hi, I have a question about the religion being extrajudicial from the human rights law. What would be the alternative? What might that look like? It's hard for me to, I completely agree with what you're saying, but it's hard for me to conceptualize what the alternative how it would be manifested.
Okay. May I? Anne, could you rephrase your question and maybe speak loudly?
Sorry, I get shy. So the professor had spoken about religion being sort of extrajudicial to the human rights mechanisms. And so my question was, how could we repair that? What might that look like to have a human rights framework that was not, that could address religion? It's beyond my comprehension, but I was curious to see what the panelists might suggest for how we could reconcile and whether there could be a legal reconciliation.
Thank you. I think I'm going to give 2 minutes for each panelist to respond as best as you can to the questions, and then give the floor back to Mahnaz to conclude this panel.
Okay.
Madhavi?
So I might try to address your question and your question at the end together.
Yeah.
So I think that much of the work that I've been studying that the Women's Learning Partnership, the partners have been doing around the world has actually been to show that, in fact, this stark contrast between the egalitarian human rights approach and a local religiously based cultural approach doesn't necessarily exist. I mean, I think a really powerful story that I heard from Isatou Tourné back at the Musawa meeting in Kuala Lumpur several years ago. She had had her genitals cut when she was 11 years old, and it was as an adult in Gambia, and it was as an adult in Gambia where she learned that, in fact, the Quran says nothing about cutting. And that was so empowering to her to hear this, because for so many decades it had been rooted in this idea that this is the religious mandate, and then when she started to educate village by village about and confronting religious authorities, saying, but there's nothing in this in the Quran about this particular practice, they had no response. They had no response, and in fact, then village after village, this is places where 75% of the girls had experienced cutting. The villages started denouncing the practice, and then she was hailed as a hero in the country. And so I think that the strategy that in studying the practices on the ground in these diverse countries that I've come up with it's called fighting fundamentalism with pluralism. And simply exposing the plurality of opinions. The Quran says this or doesn't say anything. The Hadith say this, and the constitutional law says this, and national law says this. And here's what women, when you survey them, are saying. When you see the plurality within the religion and within the culture and the country, then it exposes the idea that there is one authentic way of doing it. And just connecting it back to with terms of like a strategy or a mechanism, Joy, we were talking about how we legally authorize these guardians of culture in the customary courts. They don't have any legal training. They don't necessarily have any cultural authority, but for what we give them in terms of that authority. And I think, again, Morocco offered this really nice blueprint in terms of training judges throughout the country who represent diverse points of view, who understand the multiplicity of values and norms that are engaged in the creating of the new Mudawana, but thinking about who we're empowering in terms of the judges. I mean, is that an easy fight? No, we're struggling with it in the United States in terms of, who gets the authority of being, the justice on the Supreme Court or the judges all the way down. But just recognizing that is a normative conflict and fight, and that there are multiple perspectives, there's several opinions, and we need to, justify why we're putting certain people in authority and and interrogate what their perspectives are, why not something else. So just purely exposing the pluralism, I think it sends a deadly blow to the fundamentalist claim. And that was the idea behind the corpus. The corpus was, let's just show the diversity of approaches that are authentically Muslim or authentically Christian, and show that there isn't just one way, and now you have to choose an alternative among choices, and you have to justify that choice.
Thank you. Joy?
Okay, regarding the conflict in religions, I think what has happened is that we've allowed culture mostly to infiltrate into our religions, because you see a certain religion practiced in one particular way in one location, and then you go to another location, the same religion, and you don't see some inhibiting practices there. And another thing we must take into consideration is that men are in majority when it comes to interpreting this text, and they will interpret it as it suits them. And that's where, if they can't suppress women through culture, then the next thing is through religion. And if you don't have the interpretation, like that's why, like you said, you see text, things that are not addressed, they bring it and use the cloak of religion to cover it, just to gain control over women. And then for Anne's question, violence against women, yes, it's a term that is working. In Nigeria, we have added G, violence against women / girls, because yes, what happens to girls is also connected to the perception of the female gender, but sometimes we need to separate it, and violence against women as a term works very well for us. Thank you.
Joy. Well, I will respond as well to the issue of violence against women, as the most used terminology these days is gender-based violence, more than violence against women. But I think violence against women is still valid, more clear and more direct to nominate the huge sector of the population that are victims of gender-based violence because they are women. And I do believe that, of course, as we all know, that the Sustainable Development Goals have two goals on equality. One, the gender equality, equality between men and women and girls, and empowering women and girls. And the other one is equality between states and between other sectors in the society, which is also facing some problems. So I do believe that gender-based violence is a terminology that can be used, maybe G and G in the end and in the beginning, but we prefer to use violence against women because this term became more popular and used by the population in our countries. And it's good to make it clear that we are fighting the imbalanced relation between men and women that create this kind of violence. For the other question related to religious and human rights, for me and for our organization, the framework of us and the principles are human rights. And we do believe that you can, if you take back, as we agreed in our discussions during the last few days, that we need to bring back our language, our definition of terminologies, equality, dignity, all the terms that we can find them in the religious, but it was interpreted all the time in a way that it means that this is for men and not for women. And we can find ways, because we cannot gain any progress now in our societies if we ignore the beliefs of the majority of the population. You cannot ask a woman to fight for her rights and her religion, because she will never be able to do that. You need to encourage her to fight for her rights and to find ways to make her religion understood and practiced the way that can guarantee her rights. And in fact, I am a Christian woman in a Muslim society, and I studied the Sharia, and I found in several times that always there are ways to present something different. And to just summarize it, two examples, if I may. One is that in the Muslim countries, we have differences that is from 0 to 100. The polygamy is forbidden totally in Tunisia. In Saudi Arabia, no conditions. In Jordan, allowed with some conditions. So what is Islam exactly? The age of marriage, it can be from 9 to 21. What is Islam exactly? Beating a woman because she is not obeying, it goes from just do like this to kill her. in different يعني circumstances, so, and different countries. So also I think it's very important to focus on, because I want to prove now that if you were sensitive enough to the beliefs of people, you may gain things. Without the voting of the Islamic representatives in the Jordanian parliament, the abolishing of Article 308 will never pass. And that was because we were challenging them that the marriage in Islam is al-mawadda wal-rahma, love and respect.
Compassion.
And compassion. So we were asking them through the media and the social media, is the contract will be a shari'i, eligible, legitimate contract if it was based on the goal of a man to escape the punishment and the woman to be يعني تنستر من الفضيحة to cover what happened to her, escape the stigma. And they used to say, no, it is not a valid contract. So this helps us a lot, and they shift from being supporting for this practice to vote against it. And one other example, and last one, when the new democratization process in Jordan happened, there was a proposal by the Islamist members of the parliament that they want the lands that are owned by the state and provided to the individuals to be used. Al-Aradi al-Amiriyya, Aradi al-Dawil, state land.
State-owned land.
This state land is not a property of the man who will inherit his family or his relative. It was distributed equally between boy and girl before their proposal. When they present the proposal and they said it should be distributed, a boy will inherit double of the girl, there was in that parliament 9 Christian members and more than 12 communists and lefts and more than 15 nationalists and many secular members. And in 1 second only, all of them 100% votes, they agreed on the proposal. So in my opinion, it is not the religious, it is the patriarchy, it is they want the lands to be theirs. And because of that, because when we dig more deeply, we found that Abu Hanifa, who is one of the schools of interpretation, make it very clear that the shares of inheritance applied only to the property and not to the use, things that you are using. So it is even under the Islam, the previous one was the right one, and the new one is against Islam. So you can imagine how they are using religious.
That's a wonderful way to end this amazing panel. Thank you so much. Thank you to all three of you. I think I'm going to give back the floor to Mahnaz to wrap this up. Thank you, everybody.
Stay up here, stay up here. Well, I'm not going to sum up the beautiful stuff that the ladies have said. I just wanted to say that in terms of religion, which seems to tie ourselves into a knot, basically, I think that all of the Abrahamic religions are almost exactly the same. There's just wonderful stuff, wonderful values of equality, justice, helping the other, feeling the feelings of others, empathy, and all of that. There's also things that were probably relevant at some point, which are no longer relevant. So what we basically want to do is what we have done, the partnership has done, and others that have worked with us have done. And that's the kind of thing that empowers women. And all of you have mentioned it, and I think the Moroccans have done it. It's to basically help women understand that they are agents, that they can decide what the text of the Holy Book says. They have as much a right to do that as anyone else. And they can decide between various statements. Some have to do with the Declaration of Rights, some has to do with CEDAW, some has to do with the Constitution, some has to do with some literary masterpiece, and some has to do with the religious texts. And they can decide between these which ones are relevant to a particular case. And I think that's what we have done in the past, and it has been very successful. And the way that this work has been done in Morocco, for instance, which had published very studiously and nicely their arguments, what was mentioned in terms of different schools of Islam with contradictions, and also the Declaration of Rights, and also the sociological studies, which women could then decide what they wanted to. This was something that was translated by WLP. It was sent in Persian, in French, in Arabic, and other languages. The Iranians picked it up, and when we met in Thailand in 2005, and they started the 1 million signatures campaign in 2006. And then we presented that launch here in Washington, and Zaina Anwar from Musawa, who was on our board at that time, took it to Indonesia. We all were there, and Musawa was started, which is a little bit too focused for us on religion only, on interpretation, because we basically want to use the religious texts and study them and learn from them and use them for our benefit. But we don't think that the texts in Islam or in any other religion are only a matter of a misunderstanding or misinterpretations. There is, in fact, statements that say you got to beat the wife, or and you got to do this or that, or you can have 4 wives. So these are there. They apply to some other time. And also in Islam it says, come to adjust to the changes that have happened, and guides you to that. That is, you have to adjust the text to the times, and that's the most important thing. The only thing that I think that was brought up that was very important is the economic importance of certain changes so far as men are concerned. When you come to that, it becomes the most vital and the most difficult to change, like inheritance. You can change a whole lot of stuff, but when it comes to inheritance or ownership, it becomes much harder. So we have to realize that it's a matter of a give and take in terms of funds and money and land, and so we have to mobilize more strongly in these senses. And of course, we have to also, in the case of Iran, which Merangiz mentioned so well, I would use this as a last comment, that what happened in Iran for the time when it happened, which was, you have to remember context, this happened in 1975. Merangiz and I were this high, and she was a very young legal advisor, and I was a very young head of the women's organization. But what happened at that time was that you had polygamy limited, you had custody of children to women as well as men. You had all sorts of possibilities, not only in the family law, but also in related laws, like flexi time for working women, like having equal rights, equal pay for equal work, like obligatory childcare on the premises of the workplace. You also had the plan of action of Mexico, which in the case of Iran said, since everything is related to women, all issues are women's issues. At that time, we didn't have the terminology, but that's what happened. We had 12 ministries sitting together, like the Interagency Council, the beautiful Interagency Council, except that these were ministers under the prime minister to look at the budget and to look at the programs to make sure that they are egalitarian distribution of possibilities and so forth. It was an amazing thing 40 years ago. It still hasn't been replicated in any Muslim majority country, in any global South country, and some of it not even here. I'm sorry that I'm saying this, it's the truth. It's there. You can look at it, you know. And of course, I'm saying all of that not to glorify our childhood experiences with Marangis, but in order to say, be afraid of the backlash. We are still suffering from the backlash that we got. And it wasn't because we didn't have a wide variety of women supporting it, but there were a whole lot of other people who were not. And it was not, the society did not have the possibility of comment, of differentiation and conflict that would possibly ease some of the tensions. So reaction is what we're feeling right now across the world. And I think that we are strong enough, we are wise enough, we are motivated enough to begin all over again from a place of more possibility and more connection and more knowledge. And to this time do it really strongly and beat the backlash back and have not only egalitarian families, but have it reflected in all of our other institutions. So I don't know if Milan, you want to say something or not? May I just have one other thing before I ask you to just say a few words, just to make us feel better? Seeing you makes us feel better. So I want to ask the ambassador, Abou-Habib. Where is she? There she is. This is a very unique woman, our board member, Abena. She is not only a professor, and not only an activist, not only a poet, but also ambassador to the entire Latin America. And so I would like this exceptional woman to give us a poem that will represent all aspects of her personality that we are so very proud of. Abena.
Good evening. I'd like to say again how wonderful it is to be part of the Women's Learning Partnership. And I always tell everybody I have the best part because I'm on the board to read poetry. She's also a wonderful organization to be activist and dealing with all these heavy things that says every time we need to have a poem. When I was thinking of what I would read, I'm actually not going to read the first poem I thought of, which was a much more feisty poem about women and resistance, but I actually decided I wanted to concentrate on the question of family and to read a tribute to a woman who was both a family member and whose lifetime was dedicated to enlarging the concept of family. She was an advocate. I don't think she'd have called herself a feminist advocate, but only because were she still alive, she'd be 99 next week. And she grew up in a different age and time. She was the wife of, she was my aunt, the wife of the brother after my father. My father was the eldest of 13 children, and she married son number 2. And I was thinking of her because she was an advocate for children. After briefly running a dance academy when she was studying in England with her husband, she returned to Ghana and became a social worker who dedicated her professional life to the welfare of children. She spent many years as the director of the Osu Children's Home, which was the first and for decades the only children's home in Ghana in the capital city. And it's significant because I remember my mother saying that they were very proud of her, but they were also very sad at the existence of the home itself, because they had been born in a Ghana where the concept of a special home for children who had no family was anathema. Everybody has a family. And the fact that you needed a children's home was actually indicative of a breakdown of how they had thought of the society. But after many years as the director of the children's home, a chance meeting, and it was one of those things. She was a very committed Christian and was very led by prayer. And a chance meeting at an airport on her way to Norway, to a meeting in Norway in 1967, led her to Herman Gmeiner, who was the founder of the SOS Children's Villages in Austria. And that chance encounter so impressed her that she decided to invite him to Ghana to build an SOS Children's Village in Ghana, and spearheaded the work through. And the SOS Children's schools in Ghana today are amongst the best schools in the country. But she did this work quietly and got very little recognition for it at the time. The first school was founded in 1970, and the first village opened in 1974. And it was after 30 years before her work was actually acknowledged. And they named, in fact, an honor. There's an honor now today in Ghana named after her work. And the first award was presented a few weeks after she passed away. And I was thinking about her and I want to read you a poem, the poem I read for her funeral service in July of 2007. Because I was thinking about my aunt and remembered her. And I remembered a couple of a specific occasion which became for me a metaphor for the way she lived her life. Accra is on an earthquake zone. We have an earthquake every 30 years. It's not really radical, so it doesn't hit the news, but it happens. And I remember there was one that happened when I was a little girl. I could only have been about 5. And the earth did shake, and some walls came tumbling down. But my aunt knew that my mother would not be able to reach me to get me from school, from nursery school. And she came for me and guided me to her house until my mother could come. And I remembered that incident, and it became a metaphor for her protection of children and how in the context in which she was working, she was in fact creating a different kind of family and becoming an advocate for children who otherwise had nobody. So it's called One Last Embrace for Auntie Mercy. We called her Auntie Mercy. My uncles, that is her in-laws, out of affection, called her Teacher Mercy, because she was also a teacher. And her name was Mercy. To show mercy, we touch a head, a face, a hand. In holding hands, we claim each other. This I learned as a little girl, grasping your skirt as we stood on trembling earth as the flood waters rose. Uncurling my tremulous clutch, you held my small hand firmly but gently in yours as we crossed the breached and broken wall in an intricate dance. For you, once, dancing was the business of life. Stormy life was joyous as your dance partner became your life partner. Then you learned to hold each other and pas de deux when the music stopped. And through long dirge years of sudden separations of families fractured by jail, by exile, and the shattering, searing pain of the passing of the firstborn, you exchanged your lilac gowns for indigo cloth. Yet still, through all, to shepherd children, to homes, to shelter, remained your special care. Unheralded and obedient to your life in prayer, you trusted encounters with strangers and joined a movement, SOS, to create a net to pull the children to shore, as years ago you delivered me home to the arms of my waiting mother. Ma, Auntie, Teacher Mercy, the God who named you has claimed you to take you safely home, like all those children who felt your touch like a firmly grasped hand through a storm. Thank you.
Well, I feel like that should be the benediction for this evening. It seems so deep and passionate that it's hard to follow, but I want to say that this was a tremendous discussion, and no matter how much any of us grapple with these issues, one realizes how much more we have to do, but with gratitude say thank you for leading the way, because it is so critically important. And as you said, Asma, building on what others have done to be an example to the rest of us. You know, when you were telling the story about female genital cutting or mutilation, FGM, I remembered vividly because we were talking so much about religion and culture, really mindsets. And years ago, when I was in Senegal, I had watched a skit that villagers were performing about the rudiments of democracy. You know, they were raising hands, they were shaking their fingers, they were arguing, and clearly not knowing the dialect or the language, it was very clear, regardless, that they were engaged in some kind of democratic participation. And the leader of the project said to me that sometime afterwards, the women came to her and they said, "What do you do with this thing called democracy?" And she said, "Well, is there anything in your life you'd like to see changed?" And they immediately said, "We don't want to have to go through this horrible cutting that we have to go through. But every woman has to go through it, or she is nothing. She is deprived of any possibilities that she might have in that community if she doesn't go through it. And yet many die in childbirth, many are scarred for life. The pain is extraordinary." And so they said, "Well, what do you do?" So they went first to the imam. And the imam said, "There is nothing in Islam that condemns this practice. Nothing." But it was viewed by many as a religious practice. And then they went to the village fathers, all men, and they began to explain what this was doing to them. And over time, literally person to person, family to family, they had conversations about how they had to change what they were doing in this community. And what happened was the norm, something everybody went through, every woman, changed. The norm was no longer cutting. The norm became the health of our women. And in many ways, what we're dealing with are norms, deeply entrenched traditions. And yes, there are many who take advantage of them in the name of perpetuating the outcomes they want to see and the placement that they have that they want to preserve. So I think in many ways what that illustrated for me is what was said tonight, that the biggest problem we have is changing these norms and changing these mindsets. And it's not always easy. but now FGM has been eradicated all across Senegal, in so many other countries. I've watched renunciation ceremonies in Egypt. It's amazing what can happen with a practice that's so deeply entrenched and goes to the heart of this discussion tonight. The second observation has to do with this word gender. When we talked about gender and violence against women. And what I am finding more and more, this is tremendously true, what's happening with the return of authoritarianism, even in places like Central Europe, Eastern Europe, there's an enormous backlash against the word gender, because some have deemed it in the preservation of national identity, in the preservation of authoritarian justification, that it means the destruction of our values, it means the destruction of family values, and in many ways it's also a backlash on LGBTQ. And so it's all lumped together, and it's very difficult today to get the Istanbul Convention, for example, on violence against women ratified because of the words gender. So just this is continuing to be a huge debate. And I would just say, finally, that to me, what this conversation fundamentally is about is the value of the girl, the value of a woman. And when you think that girls' lives are snuffed out just because they're born girls, you think of son preference, you think of honor killing, you think of child marriage. It all comes down to the worth of female human beings. And I think we've got to really do whatever we can to validate and value the girl. So thank you all. Thank you, Partnership, for what you do. Thank you, Manaz, for leading the way. And to all of these remarkable women in the room who have just extraordinary wisdom, experience, and achievements that truly matter no matter what country they are happening in. They matter for the rest of us too. So thank you all.